This is the story of a woman who refused to let the world define her worth. At 23, she was a single mother with $127 in her bank account, sleeping on her sister's couch, wondering if survival was the highest dream she was allowed to have. 8 years later, she owned a $12.4 million real estate portfolio, but the numbers don't tell you about the nights she cried herself to sleep, or the morning she decided those tears would become her fuel instead of her prison. Her name was Maya, and at 23, she sat in a dim bathroom at 2 in the morning, her 18-month-old daughter finally asleep in the next room. She stared at her phone screen, the banking app showing $127.34. Rent was due in 6 days. She had no college degree, no family money, no safety net woven from privilege or connections. The father of her child had left when she was 5 months pregnant, promising support that never materialized. Her own parents had made their disappointment clear when she chose to keep the baby. The world seemed designed to remind her daily that she had made the wrong choices, that she was behind, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps came her way. She worked 2 jobs. During the day, she waited tables at a diner, where the lunch rush meant she could barely pause to breathe, carrying plates and smiles while her feet ached and her back screamed. At night, after putting her daughter to bed at her sister's apartment, she cleaned office buildings until midnight, vacuuming carpets in spaces where people made in 1 hour what took her a week to earn. She had applied for better positions, dozens of them. Each rejection email felt like confirmation of what she feared most, that this was all life had to offer. That her daughter would grow up watching her mother work herself to exhaustion just to stay poor. That the dreams she once had were luxuries she could no longer afford to carry. But that night in the bathroom, something shifted inside her. Maybe it was exhaustion turning into clarity. Maybe it was the thought of her daughter inheriting this struggle. Maybe it was simply that she had nothing left to lose. She thought about the office buildings she cleaned. Expensive spaces filled with expensive furniture, occupied by people who seemed to move through the world differently than she did. What did they know that she didn't? What invisible rules had they learned that kept them on one side of the divide while she remained on the other? The next morning, instead of scrolling through job listings she wasn't qualified for, she went to the library. She checked out every book she could find on real estate investing, business, and wealth building. She had no money to invest, no credit score worth mentioning, but she had time between her shifts and a hunger that burned brighter than her fear. She read about something called wholesaling, about finding distressed properties, getting them under contract, and assigning those contracts to investors for a fee. It required no money down, just knowledge, hustle, and the courage to make offers. Her hands shook the first time she called a property owner. She stumbled over her words, sounded unsure, got rejected. She called another, and another. 27 calls that first week, each one feeling like she was asking permission to dream bigger than her circumstances allowed. On the 28th call, a tired voice said yes. She had no idea what she was doing. She printed the contract from a website, filled it out with trembling hands, and spent 3 days finding an investor willing to take a chance on her. Her assignment fee, $4,200. When that check cleared, she sat in her car and cried for 20 minutes. Not because $4,000 changed everything, but because it changed what she believed was possible. She did 3 more deals that year, making $14,800 total. It wasn't enough to quit her jobs, but it was enough to keep going. Every small win was a victory against the voice that said she couldn't, that told her to stay small, to accept less, to stop dreaming. By age 25, she had done 21 wholesale deals and saved $38,000. She bought her first rental property, a small duplex that needed work but had good bones. She learned to fix things herself, watching YouTube videos at midnight, trading her exhaustion from cleaning offices for exhaustion from building something that belonged to her. At 27, she owned 4 rental properties worth $675,000 combined. She finally quit her waitressing job. The day she turned in her apron, The manager, who had once told her to be realistic about her future, asked how she was doing. She smiled and said she was figuring it out. At 29, everything accelerated. She had built relationships with contractors, learned which neighborhoods were positioned for growth, understood numbers and negotiations in ways that once seemed like foreign languages. She was no longer the desperate girl making nervous phone calls. She was a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. She started buying larger multifamily properties, a 12-unit building for $1.3 million, an 18-unit complex for $2.1 million. She used creative financing, partnerships with other investors, and every ounce of knowledge she had fought to acquire. The banks that once wouldn't approve her for a credit card were now competing to lend her money. The investors who once dismissed her were now asking for her advice. The industry that seemed designed to keep people like her out was slowly, reluctantly, opening its doors. By age 30, her portfolio was worth $8.7 million. She hired a property manager so she could finally be present for her daughter without the weight of constant survival crushing her chest. She moved them into a home they owned, with a yard and a room painted exactly the color her daughter wanted. At 31, her portfolio reached $12.4 million across 43 units. But the number that mattered most wasn't in her bank account. It was the morning her daughter, now 10 years old, asked her, "Mom, can girls be anything they want?" And she could answer with absolute certainty, "Yes, I'm living proof." The sister who had given them a couch to sleep on became her first employee. The diner where she once served breakfast now sits across from one of her properties. And sometimes she stops in, leaves generous tips, talks to the servers who remind her of who she was. She didn't need approval from the people who once doubted her. Her success spoke louder than their doubts ever did. The world that once seemed designed to keep her poor had been bent to her will through sheer determination and refusal to accept no as a final answer. What she learned changed not just her bank account, but her entire soul. 1. Your circumstances are not your prison sentence. They're your starting point. 2. The world doesn't give you permission to succeed. You take it. 3. Every expert was once a beginner who refused to quit. 4. Your children are watching. You're not just building wealth. You're building their belief in what's possible. 5. The fear never completely goes away. You just get better at doing things afraid. 6. You don't need to know everything. You need to know enough to start, and be brave enough to learn the rest along the way. Right now, someone watching this is where she was at 23. Scared, tired, wondering if this is all life has to offer. Let her story whisper to the part of you that still believes in more. Your breakthrough is coming. Keep going. If this story moved you, if you felt even a flicker of possibility reignite inside your chest, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of people who refuse to stay small. Comment below with one action you'll take today toward your bigger life. Share this with someone who needs to remember they're capable of more than survival. Your empire starts with a decision. Make it today.